Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter, of course, at Movies TV Mad, and welcome to Sunday's edition of the dceu Daily, and welcome to Superman Sunday, where today we are going to discuss the two live-action story arcs that Superman's ever had in live action. One's on Smallville and one's the Snyderverse. They're the only two times Superman's actually had a story arc. But both creatives in Alfred Gough and Miles Miller and Zack Snyder never got to complete their story arcs. Yes, we saw Smallville from season 1 to 10, but our Miles had to leave Smallville because they fell out with the CW. Allegedly, there was even legal proceedings between the two. So that's a sad thing, but at least our Miles got to tell 7 seasons of their Superman story arc. And then Kelly Souders and Brian Peterson, two writers they brought into the show from season 2, completed it. So our Miles' vision was pretty much there at the end, but they did have to leave because of a falling out with the CW network. Now Zack Snyder, I think it's been well documented, he came in, he made 3 movies, we finally got to see the Snyder Cut. So we've seen 3 movies from this Superman story arc. But there's actually supposed to be another 2 Justice League movies, and then maybe even another Man of Steel movie as well. And I just think what Snyder was planning for Superman was fantastic. Right now, Henry Cavill's Superman story arc hasn't been completed. It's waiting on completion. It should be completed. I demand it's completed because it's fantastic and it's a shame. And you can blame pundits and certain fans, and the MCU. The pressure from them was immense, and the people who love the MCU, who have decided every film has to be like the MCU, which is not true, of course. But what was Snyder's story arc? Well, Snyder's story arc is very interesting, and it's not simplistic, and it has a lot of depth. So the first movie, Man of Steel, which the story was developed by Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan and David Goyer. I mean, imagine a Superman story being developed by those 3 people. That's fantastic in itself, really keen storytelling minds. So the idea of Man of Steel is, before Superman or Kal-El or Clark Kent knows where he is, he's got a big threat to deal with. So we see him as a baby on Krypton. We basically see flashbacks to him on Smallville, and we see him traveling the world trying to discover the secrets of his Kryptonian heritage. He doesn't know he's from Krypton at the beginning of the movie. And so he's traveling the world. He works on an oil rig, and that oil rig sequence is beautiful. Is it an oil rig he works on? Is it a ship? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So he then discovers the spaceship in Man of Steel. He sees the false, let's call it the false ghost of Jor-El, the projection. Jor-El tells him everything, and he puts on the Superman costume. Some people believe it was too quick when he put it on, but this is what you got to understand. When Christopher Reeves puts his costume on, he's ready to take on the mantle of being Superman. When Henry Cavill puts that costume on, he's nowhere near ready. He hasn't even had any training. Christopher Reeves' Superman actually spends another 10-15 years in the Fortress of Solitude after he's built it, being trained. Then he goes to Metropolis and accepts his mantle of Superman. So it's just a different way at going at the same material. It's like Smallville, a different way of going at it. And it's great, and that's what storytellers should be doing. They should be telling the same copy and pasted storyline all the time. Just because Superman the movie is very, very popular and Christopher Reeve is very popular, doesn't mean you do that every time. Smallville doesn't follow what Christopher Reeve did. Smallville did something very different, and we'll get to that in a minute. And so when he puts the costume on, he's had no training, and then General Zod announces himself. He wants Kal-El. He wants him. Obviously he wants the Codex, and then it all begins. It all kicks off. It's a bit like watching 24 when Jack Bauer's daughter is kidnapped, and he's supposed to not be in action anymore. He's an office bod by then, and then he's called into action. And it's like Henry Cavill's Kal-El Superman in this movie. He's just about put the costume on, he's called into action, He has no experience. This is Superman Begins. It's a really great way of beginning the Superman story. So he's got powers and abilities. He can fight up to a certain level, but he doesn't have the prowess of Feora and Zod and the other Kryptonians. And so it's very, very difficult. And obviously the other situation is the government and the army don't trust him until he actually saves that colonel. I think he's a colonel. Love that guy, by the way. Christopher Maloney, Law and Order SVU, and now Law and Order Organised Crime, which is even better. You should watch that. But yeah, Maloney is actually brilliant in Man of Steel. I'm really happy he was included in that. I hope we see him again one day if Snyder comes back. And so this whole thing is a battle, and there's consequences. He's not trained. He can't be fighting Zod and Feora and the rest of them and saving people at the same time. He tries. He saves the soldier falling from the helicopter, but he's not Christopher Reeves Superman. He hasn't had the training. He can just about focus on fighting this threat. But this threat are actually his own people. They want to turn Earth into Krypton. So there's a lot of deep themes in this movie. And so he saves the day by killing Zod because he's got no choice. But Metropolis is destroyed. And so the next chapter of his arc is basically there's a Superman camp where people love Superman and they believe in the insignia and they love him. And there's another side to the camp, like Lex Luthor, who sees Superman as a threat. That's why he creates Doomsday in the first place. Although it's ironic that he creates another superpower being to beat another. There's a bit of hypocrisy, but you know, mad titans are always got lots of irony and hypocrisy in their actions. And so there's people who fear Superman, which is understandable. Not everyone is going to give him adulation. And so Clark goes through this thing. He becomes, in a way, Superman for his Earth father, Jonathan. This is what Jonathan wanted for him. And so he becomes it. And it's brilliant, that line when he goes, Superman was never real, it was just a dream of a farmer from Kansas. And then Lois says, this means something. It did in my world. My world doesn't exist anymore. This is all part of the arc. And then you see the deconstruction of Superman and Batman, by the way, but we'll keep to Superman. And then he dies. He dies after all that disbelief of him and people not having faith in him. He saves the world. And then, typical of the human race, like when you hear people dying and everyone loves them, and when they're alive everyone speaks shit about them, everyone loves Superman. They see him as a hero. In that moment when he sacrifices himself, he becomes, to a point, but not completely, our Superman. So then we go to the Snyder Cut. He's resurrected. He literally defeats, what's his name? Steppenwolf. But there's more to the story than that. And Zack's already told us that. So Justice League 2 is mainly set in the nightmare future. So we're mainly going to be seeing the evil Superman. But of course this is all part of the arc. But this is a reality that may never come to be. So it's a weird kind of thing that, you know, Zack went to do. Because certain things happen in the future. But if they defeat, if they stop it, if they go back to the past and stop it, just like the Flash tries to do by warning Bruce Wayne. And that's what happens. That's the point of sending the Flash to Bruce Wayne in the past, to stop it from happening. I think they'll go to and from the nightmare future to present day kind of DC. So Justice League 2, I hope we see it one day. I'm not losing hope. But then you get Justice League 3, where this really completes, to a point, Superman's arc. Because Zack has told us, in the third act of that movie, Kal-El, Superman, leads a meta-human army. Wow, what an arc. Imagine that. Close your eyes and imagine that. Henry Cavill in his Superman costume, his blue Superman costume, leads a meta-human army. He's the leader of these superpowered beings. He's the future. He's our saviour. He's their saviour. We start off on Man of Steel, where he's thrusted into battle without any training. Then we go to BVS, where people doubt him and he sacrifices himself for the world that doubted him. Then we go to the Snyder Cut, where he's resurrected and he saves the world again. And then in Justice League 2, we're dealing with the nightmare future. We're not dealing with his arc so much, but it's part of the arc, so to speak. And then in Justice League 3, he becomes, that moment when he leads the metahuman army, he becomes our Superman. He becomes the Superman we saw in Superman the movie. He becomes the Superman in the comics. More probably the Superman of the comics than the Superman from Superman the movie. Because whatever people say, yes, Christopher Reeve's Superman feels like the comic book Superman, but there's a lot of liberties taken in that film as well, if you're looking carefully. So Cavill's Superman leads a metahuman army. And it's brilliant. Now, if Zack got his own way and did another Man of Steel film, then we see our Superman having his own 2.5-hour, 3-hour adventure, and then other creatives take it over. We've had that arc. Zack steps aside, he initiates a flashpoint, and then things change. They could still use the same actors or different actors or introduce new versions of Superman. That's the whole great thing. So Snyder's arc is absolutely fantastic because nothing's easy for Superman. Nothing's easy for a superhero on our world, in the real world. And this is what Snyder's saying. He's not saying this is the only way you can make superhero films. This is the way I make them. And that's okay. It's the same thing as me saying, I don't speak a universal truth. I speak my truth. Within his DC movies, Zack was speaking his truth. Not yours, not Kevin Feige's, Zack Snyder's. And that's absolutely valid. It's okay as an artist to speak your truth. It's okay as someone speaking on YouTube or social media to be speaking their truth. It doesn't matter if you don't agree. Disagree. That's what the comments are there for, as long as you're constructive. You don't have a go at someone's nose because you don't agree with them. You have an adult conversation. And sometimes when people don't do that, I don't understand what's wrong with people. Decent people become beasts on the internet because they think they can get away with it. And they can. And this is what happened to Snyder. People didn't like his truth. Snyder wasn't saying this is the universally best way to make a superhero movie. Now, I don't want to argue with that. I can argue that because I think it's magnificent. Superman's arc is magnificent. And we deserve to see all of it. Now, moving on to Smallville. Now, did I say this earlier? Because I've actually had to start again on this video, so I'm confused what I've said and what I haven't said. So I'll say it again. Season 1 is brilliant because our Miles actually were able to make Kryptonite a character on this show. And some people don't actually like the meteor rocks and the meteor freaks. I like them because it gives Superman, or should I say Clark Kent, enemies to fight every week, superpowered enemies, and it works. So in Season 1, you know, Clark embraces his mantle in Smallville as the hero of Smallville that nobody knows about. In Season 2, he finds out where he's from. He meets Christopher Reeves' Dr. Virgil Swan, a very emotional moment, by the way, and he finds out where he's from and what his planet's from. And he finds out the meteor rocks are called Kryptonite. And it's great. Season 3 is the darkest season so far, thus far. And really, it's more about Lex than Clark, because this show was originally titled The Trials of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor. That came from Alfred Goff's and Miles Miller's mouths themselves. And the early stages of this show, I would say the first 7 seasons, is The Trials of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor. It's great. And really, as much as this is about Clark Kent's pre-Superman story, it's also about Lex Luthor's pre-megalomaniac age. And that's great, because you can see hints towards what he's going to become, Lex, but he's still an amiable, nice guy. But on the show, when we get to seasons, and you know, mid-season 5 to 6 and 7, Michael Rosenbaum does an amazing thing. He's no longer that amiable Lex. He's becoming the megalomaniac, and you can see the transformation, the change, and it's so good. Really enjoyable. Michael Rosenbaum's a great actor. Why he's not still doing more in kind of his art, I don't know. Maybe he just gave up. Maybe he just had enough. I don't know what happened there. He does his podcasts, Inside of You. They're great. But Michael Rosenbaum, I thought after Smallville would win an Oscar. I thought Michael Rosenbaum is that good. So I don't know what happened there. It's a shame. Great Lex Luthor. The best Lex Luthor as far as I'm concerned. I like Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, but Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor is something so extremely special. And so It's a double-jointed show, if you like, in its first 7 seasons. It's about Clark Kent and Lex Luthor. It's interesting that way. So we get to season 4, where he meets Lois Lane for the first time, and where he and Lex Luthor and a bunch of others are looking for these 3 elements. Now this is brilliant, because these 3 elements put together have the knowledge of the universe. They will ultimately build the iconic, Superman's iconic Fortress of Solitude. But what I love about Alan Miles, in the way that Zack did as well, making Superman earn everything he gets, Superman Clark Kent has to earn the right to have these 3 elements. He has to stop these villains of getting them. Because if they touch human blood, then they will create a beacon that brings another meteor shower to Earth. And that's what happens in the season 4 finale. That one of the most expensive finales still to this day ever made, and it looks great. And then finally we see the fortress rise. But he doesn't embrace his destiny. He doesn't even have his training, because he goes back to save Chloe and to see what's happened to his parents. So there was always a reason why Clark couldn't fulfill his destiny. Obviously they wanted to keep the show going, the more popular it became. Season 6, great, because at the end of season 5, Zod has taken over Lex's body, and basically he banishes Clark to the Phantom Zone. And in the beginning of season 6, we actually see, for the first time in live action, I don't know if we used to see it in the Dean Cain show if we ever saw the Phantom Zone, but I never really took much notice of that show, not my cup of tea. But we saw an amazing visual experience for the Phantom Zone. And it's not just that, Clark hasn't got his powers in the Phantom Zone, and there's zoners, and ultimately when because Clark uses a doorway made for members of the House of L to use to go back to Earth, he lets out the zoners. They're criminals. They were there for a reason. Clark's not a criminal. He was banished there by a criminal, of course, General Zod. So in season 6, he's got to stop all these zoners. And Lex is after them too, because he wants them. And ultimately, once the final Phantom touches Clark, he pretty much becomes Bizarro. But not a comedic Bizarro, something a darker version of Clark that looks like Tom Welling. Tom Welling does amazing. So then you've got season 7, which is really the final act of Lex Luthor becoming this megalomaniac we saw as kids. In comics, in animation, in movies, and he becomes it. And ultimately we find out that Lionel Luthor knew all about Clark, and Clark was named the Traveller. Lionel was in Smallville that day with a very young Lex Luthor to capture the Traveller and use him for himself, because there was a group called the Veritas Group, 3 or 4 wealthy families who wanted to greet the Traveller. He killed them all, Lionel Luthor, Lex's father, so he could have the Traveller for himself. But Virgil Swan knew all about it. He was part of Veritas, by the way. Ultimately, in the show, Christopher Reeves' character looks like he was killed off by Lionel Luthor as well. And Lex Luthor killed Professor Swan's daughter in an amazing moment where you see Lex holding a blood-soaked locket, her locket. So Smallville really had lots of depth. Smallville could do the silly teenage stuff, but it never forgot it was telling the story before the story. So it left, Alan Miles, the creators of the show, left the show with Lex Luthor in the fortress. Lex Luthor has found this, the whole thing in season 7 is finding something that can control the Traveller Clark Kent. Lex gets it, but basically, as Lex is holding it in the fortress, it starts to collapse, the fortress starts to collapse. But unlike the Lex Luthor in BVS and in the comics, this Lex Luthor never hated Clark Kent. He believes Clark has to die, that he's a threat. But he kneels before him and he goes, "I love you like a brother, Clark, but it has to end this way." This Lex Luthor thinks that this version of Clark Kent has to die, but he loves him so much as a brother. Think about this, he's willing to die with him. And this is the power of deep storytelling. Just like what Snyder did in different ways. Lex Luthor loves this version of Superman Clark Kent. He doesn't hate him, he just feels that he has to die. Ultimately, it's Lex that's the threat and not Clark Kent. But obviously, Lex has gone too far by this point. So the Smallville Superman arc and the Snyderverse Superman arc are both brilliant. They're really telling deep stories. They're taking their characters through a step-by-step story. Other versions of the character haven't done that. Superman and Lois isn't really doing that. Superman and Lois is really telling the story of the sons and what will happen to them. And Superman's a periphery character, if you like. He's there, he's a hero, he has the challenge of raising these boys with Lois Lane. It's different, it's great, it works. But it's not really mainly about Superman. And that's the thing. And when you see that, there's a lack of belief in Superman, so they add other elements to it. Look, I'm not a Superman and Lois hater, but I think someone one day may focus a story again on Superman. Snyder did it. Alan Miles did it. Tom Welling's Clark Kent was the main character of that show, as was Lex Luthor. If you're going to tell Superman stories, tell Superman stories. And as a writer, if you don't believe that there's enough in the Superman story to make him relevant, and you don't believe in Superman, and you find it hard to tell Superman stories, here's my advice. Don't tell Superman stories. Snyder believed in the character enough to give him a story arc. Alfred Goffin Miles Miller believed in the character enough to tell a story about that character and how he becomes Superman and the day-to-day struggles of being a teenager from another planet and taking it seriously. So they believed in that. And I hope the people making the Val Zod Superman movie believe in Superman. And I hope Ta-Nehisi Coates and J.J. Abrams believe in Superman enough to tell these versions of this character story in a good way. Because I've said it before, Val Zod has probably got a more interesting backstory and even character traits than the Kal-El Superman, than the Clark Kent Superman. Very interesting. I've been reading the comics, we've read out the backstory here together. I think it's very interesting. That doesn't mean I don't like Clark Kent. I'll call him the main Superman without being controversial. But I think these other versions of Supermen, who happen to be black people, and will be played by people of colour, just have a lot more depth in their story. So this is what Alfred Goffin, Miles Miller and Zack Snyder attempted to do. Put a bit more depth into the character. And they did. They did without ruining the character, in my opinion. I know everyone doesn't agree with that. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Zack Snyder didn't take anything away from your Superman, because your Superman's still out there. He's there in the Christopher Reeve 4 movies. He's there in the Superboy series. He's there in the Lois and Clark TV show starring Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain. He's there all over the place. He's in your comics. He's in your animation. Zack didn't take anything away from you. And Alfred Goffin, Miles Miller didn't take anything away from you. They told a different story. They decided that Lex Luthor would be in Smallville and he would have met Clark Kent before he becomes Superman. That was their vision. And you're allowed to tell different stories. And the beauty of comics is they have the multiverse. Now, Smallville kind of used the multiverse in the later seasons, but they didn't use that as an out. They just treated Smallville like an Earth 1. For me, it never was. For me, it was an Elseworld, but it wasn't really. In this universe, Smallville was Earth 1. And this is how Superman's story was forged. And it's great. It's great to have storytellers tell a deep story about my favourite fictional hero, instead of just going through the motions. I think that's the problem with Superman Returns. He's kind of going through something in Superman Returns in a way. He's returned. Lois Lane doesn't believe in him anymore. He has a son that he doesn't know is his son. Lex Luthor's still after him. But it's not a beginning of a story. It's continuing somebody else's story. And that's the problem with Superman Returns. Now, I'm happy Brandon Routh is Christopher Reeve's Superman, and I hope he gets another movie and more opportunities to play that version of Superman. But with Snyder's Superman and Alfred Goff's and Miles Miller's Superman, they did their own thing. They started from scratch and they told a story. And I think for a storyteller, with these iconic characters especially, that's the most amazing thing of all. And you can't beat that. You can't. And whether you like the Snyderverse, whether you like Smallville or not, you cannot deny the bravery of these artists and storytellers for being original with Superman. They decided not to make a Superman show, Alan Miles. They decided to tell a pre-Superman story. It didn't suit their narrative. I think the mistake for Alan Miles was they should have done 5 years of Smallville and then 5 seasons of a Metropolis show, but they had a problem there. Clark Kent didn't want to wear the costume. So how can he be in a Metropolis show if he doesn't want to be Superman? That was always the problem. As I say, another conversation for another time. But in terms of Smallville, it's a brilliant show. It's probably the best live action Superman without pretty much seeing him in the costume ever. They managed it. They pulled it off. Imagine having an iconic TV series about an iconic character and Clark Kent never wears the costume. But he's still that character. He's still a hero. He's still got powers. He still saves people's lives while coming to terms with who he is as a teenager. Because being a teenager is a very challenging time. I remember it growing up. If you're a teenager, I'm sure you appreciate that, because after all, you are a teenager. But having all this foisted on him as well, that he has a destiny. I mean, imagine when he first discovers the Kawatche Caves and he sees these Kryptonian symbols and everyone's pulling him in different directions. The Luthors are investigating them. They're getting close to the truth about Clark Kent. So there's a lot of pressure there, but it's a great story arc. It really is. And the completion of it is really special. And at least Alan Miles' story kind of was completed by other people, but other people they had faith in. Zack Snyder never got that luxury. There's so much more to Cavill's Superman story to go. And I don't know about you, but I want to see Henry Cavill's Superman leading a metahuman army against Darkseid. Because finally, in Snyder's story, he becomes the Superman we always wanted him to become. Yes, he's deconstructed at the beginning. He's not Superman yet. But ultimately in that movie, in Justice League 3, he becomes Superman. And that's the climax of his story. He even has a child by the end. Everything comes full circle. That's what Snyder was planning. And actually there's a comparison here with the Timeless Children that Chris Chibnall's doing with Doctor Who. Everyone's lost their shit about it, but you haven't even given the storyline a chance to complete. And I think what we should do with writers before we lose our shit, and we can be critical before a story's finished, but we must do the writer at least the respect of seeing their vision and their arc completed. And Snyder wasn't afforded that luxury. People just threw their toys out of the pram and said it was rubbish. How can you say something's rubbish when you haven't seen its conclusion? Jesus Christ, BVS wasn't even, it's still pretty much the beginning chapter. You still got 3 Justice League movies at least after BVS. You didn't give the man a chance, and that's unfair. So now we're heading to something else. Snyder fans rightly upset that we're heading to a sunnier, brighter kind of DCEU rather than what Snyder was constructing. Now I'm looking forward to the multiverse strategy in next year's DC films. But I am myself frustrated. I can conduct it and show it and display it in better ways than some people, but I am frustrated. Every artist deserves to tell their story and for it to be completed and not to be prejudged before pen's been put to paper for its conclusion. And that's what was wrong there. So wrong. So I still want to see the completion of the Snyderverse DCEU arc. I think there's still a chance, a big chance. We need to keep fighting. But both Smallville, both Al Miles and Snyder did a terrific job, because they treated Superman not as a figure, but as a character that will one day become a hero. That is what Cavill's Superman is. He's not really a hero until he leads out that metahuman army in Justice League 3. You can still look up to him, he's still doing good, pure things, But he's not a hero until he leads that meta-human army, and until we see it, his arc will never be completed. This has been the DCEU Daily. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives, and I will see you again tomorrow for even more DCEU Daily. Smash that notification bell so you never miss this perfection. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you again tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.